let's go ahead and get started. For those of you on the call that I don't know, my name is Scott Benson. I'm a managing partner at NewSchools Venture Fund. Happy to be hosting this exciting session today, why returning to normal in school shouldn't be our goal. The goal is a new normal, as we like to say. And so I'm excited to be joined today by a number of folks that I'll introduce in just a second. But let me begin by describing a little bit about my organization and what we're about. So NewSchools Venture Fund is a 22-year-old nonprofit organization. We fund and invest in social entrepreneurs who are reimagining education. They're focused on low-income Black and Latino students in underserved communities across the United States. We focus in three different areas: innovative public schools, learning solutions, and diverse leadership. And it's through those experiences that we have come to terms with a reality in this country, which is that some students are effectively served by the current system that we had predating the pandemic, and many students in this country, particularly those from low-income backgrounds and those who identify as Black and Latino, are not as well served by the system. And so, how do we know that? I'll just give a couple of examples, and these are really meant to be illustrative. One, graduation rate, the high school graduation rate for Black boys in this country is 59%. So, as the graduation rates across this country have ticked up year after year into the high 80s and low 90s, we still have a graduation rate for Black boys of 59%. 41% are not graduating from our high schools today, despite being the wealthiest country on earth. If you look at post-secondary attainment rates, 22% of Latino adults in this country have attained some form of post-secondary degree. By comparison, that's less than half of what white adults in this country at 47% are attaining. So just a couple of statistics. Certainly, I could share many more, but I think the reality that I'd like to express is that school, even before the pandemic and before the experience that we've all had over the last, 10 months or so, wasn't as great as we'd like it to be. And so this idea of returning to quote unquote normal shouldn't be the goal. And so the purpose of this panel is really to talk through what a new normal might look like. How might this moment be a catalyst for us reimagining what school looks like for students, particularly those that weren't well served by the current system and their families. So to answer this question, the good news is I won't be talking at you for the next 50 minutes or so. I'm joined by a fantastic group, a diverse group of folks who come at this work from a wide variety of different perspectives, and truly a depth of knowledge that I'm excited to share with you today. So first of all, my friend and former neighbor, Robin Lake, she's the executive director at the Center for Reinventing Public Education in Seattle, Washington. Carrie Rodriguez is the co-founder and founding president of the National Parents Union, and she has done a fantastic job of capturing parent and caretaker voice throughout the pandemic and has a lot of statistics and lived experience to share with us today in that regard. Matt Wunder is the CEO of Da Vinci Schools, a nonprofit charter network in Los Angeles that I've had the benefit of getting to know over the last decade. Truly a highly innovative organization serving the students of the greater Los Angeles area. And finally, David Miyashiro, who's the superintendent of Cajon Valley Union School District near San Diego, who we learned hosted a group of people live for this conference last year at his school and in his district. Well, we won't be able to replicate that same experience over the electronic medium, but are excited nonetheless to have David present on how his school district has responded so effectively to meet the needs of not only students, but families amidst the pandemic. So what I'm going to do is ask each of these individuals in turn, starting with Robin, just to share a little bit more about their organization and how their organization has responded to the pandemic. And then after that, I'm going to ask them separately to share their vision for what the future, what the new normal might look like. So without further ado, we're going to start with Robin and have her share a little bit about herself and SERPI.
Okay, great. Thank you, Scott, and hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this important conversation. Robin Lake, I direct the Center on Reinventing Public Education. We're a research and policy center at the University of Washington in Seattle. We've been doing research on systems change for a couple of decades or so, but since the beginning of the pandemic, and Scott, I can't believe it's been 10 months, but I think you're right, we have jumped in to just track what is happening or not happening out there. We've looked particularly at school district responses, but we've also worked with a team of researchers around the country to track evidence as it's gathered and just try to make sense and move knowledge as quickly as possible. And, I'll probably be a bit of the bitter pill today in talking through some of the painful elements of what we've seen. I don't want to get too far ahead of our conversation, Scott, but I think it's fair to say as maybe an understatement to say that it's been a bit of a mess, and spring was something of a chaotic disaster, summer a missed opportunity, and fall we're a little bit limping along and desperately hoping to get back to normal. And excited for the conversation today because while we can point to many, many examples of effort, incredible good intention from folks out there, we were caught flat-footed here, and there's been a bit of large-scale dysfunction. So we need to both, I think the hard task for us in this conversation is both recognizing and celebrating the successes, but also facing the facts about why there were so few examples of successful response, and what it means to look at a system that was really built to resist change, to resist innovation, and that has really hardwired inequality. So I'm very much looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thanks, Robin. Carrie, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your work at the National Parents Union?
Absolutely. So I'm Carrie Rodriguez. I'm Matthew, Miles, David, Max, and Dylan's mama. I am the mom in chief of Massachusetts Parents United and the president of the National Parents Union. We are a network of nearly 500 highly effective parent organizations and grassroots activists across the country, united behind a common set of goals and principles to channel the power of parents. And our family of advocates improve the quality of life for children across the United States and are helping to define the education conversation. So what we do is we unite parents of color, low-income parents, special needs parents, single mothers and fathers, grandparents, formerly incarcerated parents, parents in recovery, to join some of the more traditionally represented parent voices to really form this vibrant coalition to disrupt some of the traditional role of parent voice in the policy space. And we're helping to create and develop a new narrative that's inclusive of parents from a wide variety of perspectives. And you see that that's needed right now. Our network, it has been doing an incredible job of reaching those who are closest to the pain. And we've connected more than 15 million families who are seeking support, connection, and a voice in their children's education. We've been working on rapid response to meet the needs of families on the ground and to get them connected with basic essentials, as well as connected to organizations that would give them a voice in policy decisions being made about them, without them. And the national voice of parents and families from typically under-resourced or disenfranchised groups has really been critical in this moment, I think, in steering the ship and putting policymakers and elected officials, even the Biden administration, on notice that we expect to have a seat at the table. I think that this has been a critical piece that has been missing from our education space for far too long, which is why you see parent advocates and groups and groups like the National Parents Union being so widely embraced at the local, state, and federal level, as well as by the media. I got to tell you, I spent this morning organizing parent-led rallies in cities across the country, parents just coming and finding the National Parents Union out of frustration for watching their kids being, so underserved in their living rooms, and now being so frustrated at their lack of voice in these conversations that they're gathering at city and town halls. And what we're doing and what my staff is doing literally right now is working with parents in a number of major cities to make sure that we are part of the conversation, that if they want schools and frankly our mayors and our elected officials to take seriously putting children and families first in our priorities instead of in-person dining and concert halls and everything else that's open, and really focusing on education. Parents are well positioned to do it. And so we're here to support them and make sure that we are a vibrant voice in that conversation. And also making sure that along with Robin, we're providing a lot of data in terms of being able to quantify what parents think and what we want. And I can tell you unequivocally, we've done 14 national parent surveys out in the field with Echelon Insights, growing from 60% to now 68% since the spring, of parents wanting us to reimagine education, not interested in returning to the status quo. So this is a moment, I think, where parents, families, community really want to be heard on education issues, and I hope folks are listening.
So I just want to call that out, right? So Carrie's done this research that says 68% of parents in a nationally representative sample want us as education policymakers, leading organizations supporting students to reimagine education. So this isn't just like a flippant conversation that is meant for a small subset of parents across socioeconomic lines. It is a call to charge, or a charge for us to really reimagine education. We'll get in a second to what that might look like. But both between Robin's research looking at what the status quo is and seeing how shoddy it has been in many places, and Carrie seeing this mandate from parents to reimagine what school might look like for their own children, is the call to action that we're talking about today. Matt, you run schools that serve kids. I'd love to hear a little bit about your organization and what you've done in response to the pandemic yourself. Matt, you're on mute.
Digital alien, apologies. So I was just saying thank you very much, Scott, and thanks for this opportunity to share a little bit. So Da Vinci Schools serves a highly diverse student body of from 113 different zip codes across LA. Approximately half of our students qualify for a free or reduced lunch, though we suspect that the number of these students, this number will continue to grow as this economic collapse for many of our families takes hold. My wife and I have a 19-year-old son, Zach, and we want him to live a happy and successful life as an adult, and we eventually want to get him off our payroll. And we want this for all Da Vinci students and for all students, that we want them to live happy lives as they define it. And we think that that has a large college completion and education to employment, or said another way, we think of ourselves as kind of a TK to employment pipeline as a nonprofit, not as a boxed in K-12 or post-secondary organization. So we essentially have 5 different 500 student high schools, a TK through 8, a college completion program, and a professional development institute. So unlike many charters that develop a single model and scale, we instead develop proof of concepts and choose to pay it forward by disseminating what we've learned from others. And we've Da Vinciized, or said really to help others put it into their own context and needs in their particular communities. So we'll talk a little bit about our different schools. We've got Da Vinci Rise High, which is really focused on the unique needs of homeless, foster, and probationary youth. Essentially, those are students who are overage and undercredited. And they're in micro schools, and they partner with wraparound service providers to give our students all that we can provide for them. Then we have 3 high schools located on one campus that combine college prep and career technical education. And we ask kids early on to explore how do you complete college, and what might you study in college before it gets expensive and you have to change a major and adds more expense. We also were watching closely the national statistics. Scott referenced some alarming statistics, and I think everyone on the call knows the college completion crisis and the college debt crisis. And so we started a college completion program called Da Vinci Extension, or DVX. We're proud to say we have about 30 students who have completed their AA with us, one who just recently completed their bachelor's degree with us. This is through a partnership with Southern New Hampshire University, and dozens more who we help move through the weed out college classes in a safe and supportive environment. And our latest school is something called Da Vinci Connect High School. We're grateful to partner with NewSchools Venture Fund. They've been the wind beneath our wings. And this is taking what we've learned, both good and bad, and the pain points. And we're merging high school with college so that our students can earn a high school diploma and a bachelor's degree in 4 or 5 years. Core tenets that for all of our schools, they really are about people don't care what you know till they know you care. And this is really a time for students that it's about grace, not grades. We have been able to hire extraordinary people who lean in and lean for our kids, but I think they're pretty exhausted because we've had to develop a series of new systems and on top of them trying to adapt to life at home that they've never experienced, and in many cases co-teaching with their own children while they're teaching 100+ students as well. So that's a little bit about us.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. So as you can see why we invited Matt, he and his organization during, and certainly post-pandemic are innovating in ways not just in the core K-12 system that he originally started in, but around the edges as well, to make sure that both before they get to his system and then long after they would have otherwise graduated from high school are getting the kinds of support that they need, which is indicative of the kinds of innovations that we're talking about here today. How do you wrap around the kinds of support that students and families need, and how do you do that at some level of scale? And he's thinking about both. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the reins to David to round us out on the intros.
Thanks, Scott. I'm only going to use 1 of my 2 minutes of intro and add it to the futures, because I think the future share is really how we responded in terms of the coronavirus. Cajon Valley is 27 schools, about 18,000 students, very diverse community, 40 languages or more spoken. We have about a third of our parents are affluent and small business owners, essential workers. Over 2/3 of our families are at or below the poverty line, with the largest Middle Eastern refugee population in the country, right here in East San Diego County. And on March 13th, everything shut down. All San Diego County schools, 42 districts, decided all at once we were going to close. And so we sent all of our Chromebooks home with our students. I made a short 30-second message saying, boys and girls, just by staying home, you can do your part in helping the coronavirus, and we'll see you in a few weeks. It's just going to be a short amount of time. And I was wrong about the time. And then on Saturday, we did an all call to employees to say, on Monday, we're going to need to feed our students, and we don't have a labor plan. If you'd like to volunteer, here's a Google spreadsheet. Please sign up. And we had over 2,000 employees sign up to distribute free meals to our students through our Title I program. We printed these badges, essential worker badges, saying that you have the authority and privilege to travel during the governor's shutdown. And we made it a privilege to be able to come into work. And so by destigmatizing leaving the house, getting our teachers out to their classrooms really early in the pandemic, we leaned into our parents, started meeting with our PTA presidents weekly, and really learned from them about what they needed. And we started serving our families and opening our schools in April, just a few weeks after the shutdown, to provide free emergency childcare, distance learning support, make sure that our families had their meals, and then also operated Chromebook hospitals for kids who had devices that needed repair.
Fantastic. So what we decided to do with this session is to pose this question: if returning to normal isn't what our goal should be, particularly for those that are furthest from opportunity, what should that vision be, right? What should we be aspiring to? And so we've pushed each of our panelists to think about what that vision is concretely and explain some of the tenets that they would have and they would encourage not only their organizations, but the organizations across this country to take to heart as they reimagine what school might look like. So we're going to go in turn with each of the participants to walk through this. And then as participants in this conversation, what I'd love for you to do is, as you have questions that emerge, please put them in the chat. And if it makes sense to address them immediately, certainly we can do that, but we'll likely hold most of them for the end in what hopefully will be a pretty engaging conversation once you've heard the vision. So again, don't be shy to use the chat function. You guys did a great job of introducing yourselves. So feel free to pepper away the questions that are top of mind as you hear the respective visions. So Robin from SERPI is going to get us started with her vision for what the future of education might look like.
Great. I'd like to start off with an idea that we've been playing with at our center for actually several years, as we've been trying to understand how education can be more nimble, permeable, better prepare all students for the future and get beyond averages to really reach every kid. We've been really focused in on the idea that the way to do that, the way to kind of really get to a vision of what's possible, is to zero in on the kids on the margins, the kids who are the most complex learners, who have the most complex needs, with the idea that if we build for them, we build for everybody. We create the systems and structures that will work for every child. Before I talk about some of the parameters of how I think about that, I want to tell you about a phone call that I had just day before yesterday. Somebody in the Powerful Parents Network actually put me in touch with a woman in Eastern Washington, a mostly immigrant area of Washington State, and she was desperate. Her child has an IEP. The parent just learned that the child is reading at 3rd grade level, even though she's in 6th grade. She's not been making progress because of despite the fact that the district has been providing, different services, but they're just not working for her child. And the response from the district has been kind of take it or leave it. This is what we're offering you. The pandemic just, sheds a very, very bright light on this situation. In this moment, her child's not getting access to technology or in-person services or so many things. But my gosh, for years, this child has been underserved, and the parent is desperate because she's afraid that what happened to her is going to happen to her child, which is that she was passed on from year to year, from grade to grade, and the parent is barely literate, can speak English fine, but really can't read. And so this is the challenge before us. And this is just to remind us what we're trying to solve for. For me, that kind of fundamental structure around what's possible is starting to emerge in really interesting pockets across the country. We're seeing it in the schools that we have before us on this panel. But we're also seeing it in the pods movement, where we're starting to focus a lot of our attention and looking to see what's possible when you really unbound education, when you really free parents to meet the needs of their kids in this moment, and really look to communities to step up and start to solve for individual student needs. And I think what we're seeing there is what is reflected in the data that I won't share a lot of that with you right now, but I think it's obvious to all of us that in this moment, kids are learning at radically different levels, are getting radically different kinds of solutions in front of them, and will come back to school, whatever normal looks like, at radically different levels. So grade levels and seat time mean almost nothing right now, but let's just step back a moment and recognize that they really never have. We've always dealt with very extreme variation in our systems. For goodness sake, now is the time to really focus on mastery, focus on diagnostic assessments, and meeting every child where they are as quickly as possible, and orienting systems so that they're solving for kids whatever they're walking through the door with. The other thing that I think is obvious to all of us is that right now parents are being asked to co-produce and are doing really amazing things with that responsibility. So as we look to the future, I think we just have to commit to the idea that parents have to be equal partners. They are equal partners, maybe unequal partners weighted in the direction of parents. And more than ever, adults need to be accountable to parents, and parents need real information and power. I think another kind of pain point that we're seeing in the data is how many kids are disengaged right now. It's showing up in terms of actual kids who are missing. We don't know where they are. They're so disengaged and so disillusioned with learning that they are completely checking out. There always have been those kids. Now let's take a moment to recognize that kids were always a little bit bored. Sometimes they were very, very disinterested in their learning. It wasn't relevant to them. Now they just have the opportunity to turn off their screen rather than being stuck in a classroom. So let's take this time to ask them what would change things for them, what would bring them to the table in new ways. And again, in the pods, in some of the community-based organizations that are stepping up to serve kids in new ways, there are so many exciting things happening that are engaging kids. Let's hold on to those as we move forward and think about how we can build them into our systems. We've got hearing about schools that are just organizing learning around kids' passions right now. One school even gave kids $100 to go out and develop a skill that they would like to develop in this moment. Those are the kinds of flexibilities and the kinds of building for individual pathways and individual needs that we need to hold on to. And I guess the last point that I want to hit really hard is really, now is the time, if it wasn't before, now is the time to think about the ways that inequality is hardwired into our system. We're all outraged at the technology gap right now, but why weren't we outraged about uneven access to quality teachers, uneven expectations for kids, lack of opportunity for the parent that I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, to have some real ownership and real power to make sure that her child is being served well. So I could go on and on. I think I will leave it to others to talk about some of the social emotional support, some of the ways that we can engage kids in career pathways in new ways. This is very hard work ahead, both in terms of the complexity of possibilities that we want to realize in the new normal, and kind of sketching that out, having hard conversations about how we get there. But I just want to end with, this is also very political, right? If we lay out a beautiful vision that we all agree on, the harder work than the vision is going to be resisting the pull back to the status quo, fighting the interests that will try to kind of regroup around what we had before. We just can't go back to normal. Normal is what got us into this mess, and normal is not going to serve us well in the next pandemic or in the next economy. So I will stop there. One more thing, Scott. I will just add that, as I say, we've been working at the center for quite some time, just trying to map out the possibilities for a more permeable and more nimble system. And I'll put into the chat some of the work and papers that we've been developing around new approaches to accountability and funding and designing for the margins that might help people visualize what's possible.
Fantastic. Yeah, and the point I want to make is this this work on designing for students on the margin was not something that emerged within the pandemic. It's something that Robin and her team have been focused on for a long time. It's just in a moment of crisis, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And this is a moment to shine a spotlight on some of the work they've already done and amplify some of the need that much more. So completely agree. Carrie, would love to hear more about your vision given your close proximity to parent voice and caretakers around this country.
Yeah, I really identify with the woman that Robin was talking about. I'm a kid or a former kid who was expelled from public high school. I got my GED from Boston Public Schools. And I got into education advocacy because I saw my kid getting suspended in kindergarten and was terrified that they were going to go down the same path. And that's what brings parents to this movement, why we're having this critical conversation. Frankly, it's a little bit disappointing and disheartening, those of us who've been in the fight for educational justice for quite some time, that we have been trying to point out the fact that the normal doesn't work for us. We have always been underserved. And frankly, I got to call out the fact that this is only a crisis now, where we have the opportunity to reimagine education and not go back to normal and have a conversation, a real conversation about disrupting the status quo. Because now, frankly, middle class, middle America, white parents have been impacted and are now seeing this play out in their living rooms. And suddenly they're not happy. And now this is a crisis that we all must address, and we must, disrupt this and now have a much more broad conversation that may actually get somewhere. It's disappointing. And frankly, it echoes of what we saw just in terms of the opioid crisis in this country, where it wasn't a crisis when it was impacting Black and brown families, but then all of a sudden white America gets hit. And now it's a situation we must approach with urgency and compassion and pour resources in. Oh my God. So I need to call that out for a minute. But the fact of the matter is, what we're seeing and what the data tells us is that, again, 68% of parents don't want to return to the status quo in education. The message we are hearing from parents anecdotally through all of our organizations on the ground that, again, are very close to the pain and what's happening and in conversation with families every day, the toothpaste is out of the tube. And what has always been called impossible is now possible by necessity. Innovation, access to technology, giving families options, listening to parents and communities. All of these things were so impossible. We can't do that. Like, oh, that's too hard. It's impossible. We can't have remote. All of this stuff. Oh my God, we can't do that. All of it is possible. If we had had this conversation a year ago, I would be telling you about how I have all of these systems. I have administrators, I have leaders, I have state chief, everybody under the sun telling me I'm not smart enough to have options in terms of what kind of school and what kind of educational environment my child should have. I'm not in control. All of these things. And now suddenly we're under the pandemic and everything has changed. Now only I know what's best for my child. Only I know what's right for my family. And we're here to say that has always been true. That has always been true. So that is not going to be something, this toothpaste that has escaped the tube, that's nothing you're going to be able to get us to surrender very easily after the pandemic. We have seen the promised land. We have seen the light. Oh, wow. I should have options. And it tells us, all of our data tells us, again, 14 national surveys. I feel very confident in telling you by a 2-to-1 margin, parents are interested in having options continue. having the ability to choose, maybe a hybrid situation is working for their family. Maybe all remote is working for them. They want the whole menu of options available to them so that they are in the driver's seat to choose what works for their kid and their families. We have also done an incredible amount of work giving away almost $700,000 in direct funding to parents who are setting up pandemic pots. And again, I feel the need, I've got to call this out again, resource sharing and setting up small little community schools or working together to solve a community or neighborhood or family problem is not something that is new to poor Black and brown families. It's called survival in America, and it was not something that was created during the pandemic. It was not created via a New York Times article where bougie white parents in upstate New York have come across this fabulous new idea of sharing their resources. Like, that's how we survive anyway. What we have been able to do is give some of these families the resources that they need so that they can turn an unprecedented challenge into an opportunity. We trust parents. And frankly, when we opened up the gates and said, send us your ideas and your proposals, they were fantabulous. Fantabulous. We love them, right? So you had folks coming up with, the Black homeschooling mamas on the south side of Chicago who said, we actually want a culturally competent Black curriculum layered on top of what's being offered. We're going to do it. We're funding community centers in the Haitian community in Boston and the Cape Verdean community. We're funding refugee pods in Richmond, Virginia, where folks have identified opportunities to layer in cultural competency into remote education and really take advantage of this opportunity to transform education into what we've always wanted our kids to be learning, whether that's culturally or economically, financial education. Parents have very specific ideas around what they want their kids to be able to do when they leave high school, what they are ready and prepared for. Ask us and we'll tell you. We want them prepared for career pathways. This whole journey with our children does not end when you hand them a piece of paper that tells them that they've graduated high school. We want them ready to go to college if they want to go to college, into a trade, into a job. We want them to not have to struggle as much as we have had to struggle. We want happy grandbabies, all of those things. So we should be a part of this conversation. What we are seeing is that when we open up and send the right ambassadors to have conversations with families, they're willing to engage with us because we are them. And we understand the historic trauma and a lot of the damage that has been done to communities and to families as a result of generational systemic racism in these systems without any kind of restorative justice. But yet all of the expectation is that families are just going to engage. We're just going to be in conversation. We're going to help you do this. So again, there's a lot of work to be done. Parents are stepping up to the plate in this moment because frankly, K-6 education is not happening unless parents are helping to facilitate it. So you fail to engage with us and work with us to your own peril. And we are, again, seeing an unprecedented moment of parent energy where parents are taking to the streets. Again, I'm not joking when I say I am literally spending most of my day helping parents across the country organize rallies in cities all over the place because they are furious and they are in motion. You can either channel that energy for good, or it can be used against you. I would suggest to all of you policymakers that you harness this energy. You come together, give us a real seat at the table, and be ready to listen to some harsh truths about what we want our education system to be transformed to. And finally, again, that innovation that we're all talking about, all of our hopes and dreams for a brighter future about reimagining what normal actually looks like, that's got to be created with us, not to us. It's got to be co-created, collaborative, by us, with us, for our children. 78% of American families believe that a right to a high quality education should be a civil right. This is something that has bipartisan support. You have us, we're willing to work with you, but engage us as peers, engage us with respect, and tell us you need us, and don't just pat us on the head and kind of send us away. We've got ideas, we're ready to work. But we've got to acknowledge the important role that parents and families have got to play in this.
All right. You can see why we invited Carrie, because she is the voice of millions and millions of parents out here and preaching the right words to everyone on this call. So thank you, Carrie. Really, really appreciate it. So we're going to go to the last two gentlemen, both of whom serve students every single day and in their own way are innovating in this moment and beyond, as you heard a little bit. So Matt, would love to hear you share a little bit more about your vision for not only Da Vinci, but the education system writ large.
Sure. And Scott, if you can give me a time check as well when I should be wrapping up. Appreciate it. Will do. So Carrie and Robin, really grateful you're out there. And I would say the long-term vision or the long-term driving question is, how do you mass produce personalization for all kids? And I think part of that answer is this personalization response is really about a competency-based schedule. Kids of means can have opportunity through a time-based, credit-based, seat time-based system, but I think all kids need an opportunity to move as fast or as slow as they need. And then based on that chassis, if you will, I think you can push in more of a curated list, content list of what is, getting back to what Robin shared, is what are your passions? What is your purpose in life? And how do you prepare for that? And how do you go through that discovery process? And that needs to be part of the content. But I don't think you can get there until we collectively determine what empty calories or what just good content in general do you take out of, I'll say, the high school curricula and push in more, I think, student-centered, responsive, and certainly more personalized, passion-oriented content. And really move the responsibility of teacher from content deliverer to curator coach, and really pedagogical expert, learning coach, as opposed to mass producing in grade levels. But I think there's lots of policy obstacles and lots of adult-oriented interests that will make it challenging to flip to a more personalized student-centered policy and reshape the role of the teacher. But if that were to happen, and I think that's the commitment, is a more definitive, there's no blood test to help kids define their purpose in life, but it's certainly an important part of the conversation. I think financial literacy is a key component that should be mandated. But again, what do you take out of the curricula to make room for that? We know that computer programming is a large part of what many kids at least need to be exposed to. So how does that become part of the standards and requirements? Also, we're placing a bet on merging high school and college. There's a large degree of brokenness in post-secondary. And so we believe kids are more than capable. We have an advanced placement system, which is up for some criticism. But how do you scaffold and make dual enrollment really possible? And that'll really take K-12 and higher ed to work better together. And that's not an easy feat. And again, I would go back to, it all starts with building a competency-based system, which is not starting from scratch. That is happening Paul LeBlanc, the brilliant innovator of Southern New Hampshire University. He and his team have created a competency-based AA and bachelor's degree. We're trying to use that and align it to the high school graduation requirements. There's a lot of innovation, but again, whether it's seat time, whether it's instructional minute requirements, a lack of a funding system that allows for alternative systems, and really a lack of will, I think, collectively to push in a competency-based system, I think are impediments to this. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, team.
Yeah, I think certainly to draw in parallel themes with Robin and Matt articulating this vision for designing for students on the margin, which inherently pushes you to think deeply about a competency and mastery-based system. I think that is a through line that I just want to emphasize in this. It's certainly easier said than done, both from a practical implementation standpoint, from a pedagogical and academic standpoint, and also it has policy and funding ramifications. But it's not like people haven't done that, both at a small scale and in some cases a large scale, some with success and some with challenge. And it's not only the case that it's happening in and has happened in K-12, but to your push, in higher ed, it's certainly a topic du jour. And in many cases, I think higher ed is driving forward faster than K-12 in that respect, and is an interesting thing to look at as well. So just wanted to highlight the push on competency and acknowledge that that's something that's the through line. David, you serve lots and lots of students and families. Yeah. Let's round us out and hear what good work you're doing, both beforehand, certainly, and then long into the future. What's your vision for the future of education for Cajon Valley?
Are you able to see my screen, Scott?
Not yet.
No.
Try to share one more time.
Okay.
There you go. It's happening.
Okay. Great. So our vision is happy kids engaged in healthy relationships on a path to gainful employment. That used to be a jargony thing on a boardroom wall that nobody could articulate, but over the last several years, we've went back to the founding father, John Adams. Education should do two things: teach kids how to live and how to make a living. And so for us, technology had to be a big part of that. We went one-to-one back in 2014, and the focus was less tech, more human, not focusing on the hardware replacing the books, because hardware gets old really fast, but rather focusing on software and things that kids would access: computer adaptive curriculum, diagnostics, progress monitoring. And so when our kids log into their computer, they're logged into everything with data security and data privacy. And some of these things, in moving from a teacher-centric to a student-centric classroom, really allowed our teachers to prepare for the pandemic. And so in our early stages of summer school, we use summer as free learning for kids, using Title I and Title III professional development dollars to experiment and learn from kids how they learn, what works for them, and allowing teachers to spend time individually with kids in small groups on their individual progress and also projects. And that led to a modern curriculum of computer science, presentation literacy, social emotional learning, and the world of work, which we created right here in Cajon Valley. And that really prepared us for distance learning.
Distance learning will include a playlist of basic skills, subject matter, and Cajon Valley modern curriculum, which includes TED Ed, computer science, social emotional learning, as well as world of work. So we will be able to monitor student progress and engagement using computer adaptive tools, while honoring the need for rest, play.
I'm going to skip through a lot so that we have some time for dialogue, but really our goal is to bridge the gap between education and the world of work, with our mission with the city to make our community the best place to live, work, play, and raise a family for our employees, for our children, and for their families. In San Diego, we lead the region in opportunity youth. That's kids aged 16 to 24, not working and not in school. That's one of the things we're trying to get out of. And it starts with employees. So at Gallup, they have the Q12 that measures employee engagement. These are how our principals are evaluated. Do you care about your people? Do you encourage them? Do you engage them about their opinions? Do you connect them to the mission? And over the last several years, we went from a 3-to-1 ratio of employees engaged to not engaged to 10-to-1. And we're grateful that we're one of the top places to work in San Diego, so we can make that a student reality as well, using the Gallup student poll measuring hope and engagement. And we've taken some pretty big leaps and bounds there in the happiness and well-being of our children and their families. Again, aligned to our vision of happy kids engaged in healthy relationships on a path to gainful employment. Gainful employment meaning that every kid will have self-awareness, understand their unique strengths, interests, and values, have experiences along their K-12 journey on academic and career so they can articulate their story. And we do this through 4 levels of exploration in career development, starting in kindergarten. This is the RIASEC typology developed by John Holland, who created jobs for military coming back from war around interest areas. And so every year our kids experience careers in every area of interest deeply. They meet professionals doing those in their classrooms, and then they have a reflection at the end of the year. So by the time they have to make a pathway or CTE or post-secondary decision, they have a deep understanding of who they are. And again, we built this World of Work curriculum. It's both digital and in print. We've worked with the Federal Office of Student Aid to build a student financial empowerment curriculum that starts in kindergarten. So every child knows about personal finance before they get to high school. And it starts in kindergarten, starting about, how do you make goals? What's worth buying? And then leading to the college scorecard and financial planning, so that every child completes their FSA-ID and FAFSA as part of their compulsory education. We don't leave that to chance here. And these curriculums are in print, they're digital. Our warehouse here makes them. And then prior to the pandemic, it was integrated in everything we do. During COVID, we had to pivot and put everything through digital playlists. And so we partnered with Beable, and Saki Dodelson, who was the former CEO of Achieve 3000, built her new literacy framework around strengths, interest, and lifestyle progress monitoring, but integrated that into curriculum development and career development. So everything is integrated now through the conversations we have with our kids K through 12. And the last curriculum I want to share is our presentation literacy.
I've always like a big business leader, so when you see him, play dead. No, seriously, ignore the bully.
That was one of our first TEDx events, and that's important. That's Jose. And if you look on the soft skills side, creativity, persuasion, collaboration, adaptability, and emotional intelligence, those are going to remain constant. Hard skills will change. And 4 years later, here's Jose. This is right before the pandemic at San Diego State.
Jose Saavedra, who's a 4th grade student at Bastonia Language Academy in El Cajon. At a very early age, with the help of his 1st grade teacher, Jose discovered his love for public speaking.
For years, there has been a sewage issue in our border between San Diego and Tijuana that have prevented us from enjoying our beaches with freedom and have also affected the population and nature of both regions. Los niveles de contaminación.
He goes on in Spanish, and he wants to be a politician or perhaps an attorney. He's not sure, but he clearly knows who he is as a 4th grader. This year's TEDx event went virtual. We did it anyways because these kids worked so hard preparing their talks, and we streamed it live for everybody, but recorded their talks in the theater by themselves. This curriculum is free at ed.ted.com. And finally, Rakea.
Do you shower with that on? Do you have hair under there? Are you bald? These are the type of questions I get when I'm wearing my hijab.
I'm going to stop her talk there, but she goes on to talk about her rite of passage. And personal learning, defeating racism and equity in the classroom, starts with allowing kids to tell their story so that they can get to know each other deeply and well and appreciate the differences and the similarities across cultures. And that led to what we're doing today. We opened in April for our essential workers. We parlayed that into providing summer enrichment to every family that felt safe to send their kids to schools. All 27 schools were open in June. 6,000 students took advantage. We served meals to everybody through the summer, had 11,000 counseling sessions, and 850 teachers and staff showed up to serve the kids. It's my last video, and I'll turn it back to you.
I think the best thing of coming back here was that we all get to see each other again. It's been a very long time since we've seen each other, and that while we're doing it, we are safe. With the start of school closure, we took it very seriously. We went nowhere for a solid 3 months. Having the opportunity where we can send our children back to an environment that they're familiar with, they hadn't seen, and were missing so much, was really helpful. When I would pick him up after summer enrichment, he would start from the moment that he got out of the car, what he did, who he saw, like he gave a play-by-play. It lit him up to have that opportunity and continue to have the opportunity.
I'll stop there.
Great. So I know that it is an action-packed agenda for everyone, and we've got less than 2 minutes to go. I did see a few questions in the chat regarding funding and regarding seat time requirements, et cetera, and happy to follow up afterwards with resources for you guys. I'm going to pop my email address in the chat and can get you some resources to help address those questions specifically, Eddie, and I forget the other person's name who asked them, but I'll wrap here, which is to say, hopefully this provocation, which is returning to normal, isn't going to cut it. It's not going to cut it for millions of students and their families. And the idea of taking this moment of crisis, hard as it may be in this country, to imagine what a future might look like that more effectively designs for students on the margins, more effectively engages parents authentically and brings them to the table so that they're active participants and agents in their own children's lives, that designs schools in such a way that embeds competency-based learning, embeds things that they actually care about, that are relevant and that are aligned closely to what the job market needs, and doesn't just drive it through in a drill and kill environment, is, the common themes that are emanating here. We recognize that there are a ton of barriers to this Pollyannish vision of the future, but the reality is that you can overcome them, right? Many of the barriers are perceived. It is not something that people haven't done. You can design competency-based systems. You can design more engaging curriculum. You can design with families and with parents at the table. You can overcome challenges around funding, et cetera, but it takes will, right? It takes political will. It takes leveraging the parents who have voice, who found their voice in this moment, 68% of whom say they want to reimagine school and want their students to have an experience that is different and have had a taste of what empowerment looks like in certain cases. So I'll leave you with this, which is, now is the time. If you're a policymaker, if you run schools, if you're in a nonprofit organization that supports schools, now is the time, right? Like, take this moment to take the good that you've learned through this moment, ideally throw out some of the bad, and imagine a future. And so my big charge to all of you is, engage in this conversation now. There is no time like the present to begin thinking about what the future of schooling looks like and engaging your constituents in that process. So thank you guys so much for the opportunity to present a little bit today about this idea. Go forth and conquer, reimagine school for kids. Thank you.